This episode of Hot Air discusses sensitive subject matter like racism and suicide. So if you are uncomfortable with any of those topics or feel triggered, by all means, press pause, go for a cute walk, and come back next week. On with the show. Welcome back to another episode of Hot Air with me, Joshua Robert. And today's episode is not easy, it's not light, it is not playful, but it is necessary because last week in Mississippi, two men were found hanging. The images, the words, and the silence around it, well, it all brings up a history that is deeply painful and a present reality that is far from equal. And while this is not my normal topic, I do believe it is important to speak up, regardless of what your podcast theme might be, to speak up for what you think is right. And I do on my Instagram and TikTok talk a lot about racism. I did my reel responding to people stating that only 2% of white people owned slaves. I continue to see that argument made by a lot of clearly uneducated old white people. But this is something that I could not look away from. Even though I couldn't find a lot about it in the news, it's certainly not being highlighted as much as it should be. It's still an important topic. And I think any oppressed group, if I'm going to speak up for the LGBTQ plus community and talk about our rights and our free speech and equality, then I think that I should do the same for other groups. And that means Black people, because I think that Black people obviously are treated much differently. And I've had a lot of conversations with people that are close to me in which I realize that white people still don't understand what the fuck is up. So we're going to talk about it. Today, I want to take some time to walk through what we actually know about these two cases, what remains unclear, and why this story cannot be seen in isolation. It is tied to centuries of radical terror, corrupt and unchecked policing, media silence, and the ongoing struggle for simple ass justice in this country. So, yes, it's a little bit serious. This is going to probably pull at some heartstrings, I would imagine, if you're a person with a fucking soul. So, I guess brace yourself, maybe. Anywho, let's hit it. Before we get into the first case about a man named Trey Reed who was found hanging from a tree in Mississippi, I do believe in living in the facts. And so this is Josh reporting to you from the future. A few hours ago, it was released and reported on, and apparently the cause of death for this first case is officially ruled a suicide. However, there's still some mystery around the circumstances, and it would not be the first time a Black man was found hanging from a tree and that it was ruled a suicide. So just wanted to put that out there because I'm sure people listening may already know that it was ruled a suicide, and I don't want to just breeze past that. So we're going to get into the regular episode that I recorded before this information was even released. The first case is that of Damar Trayvon Reed. He goes by Trey, so we're going to call him Trey from here on out. Trey was a 21-year-old student at Delta State University in Cleveland, Mississippi. He was originally from Grenada, Mississippi, and he was studying on a campus where he should have been preparing for his future, surrounded by peers, by energy, and by possibility. Instead, last Monday morning, just after 7 a.m., his body was discovered hanging from a tree on campus near the pickleball courts. And let's be really clear here. When a Black person is found hanging from a tree, that is a lynching. And I am tired of seeing people downplay this, if not completely ignore it. And we will talk in more detail about this case, whether it was a suicide or a lynching, or those are the only two options. But university police responded along with the county coroner's office, the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, and other agencies. So we have some responses, and almost immediately, the language started to take shape. that there was no evidence of foul play. That phrase is so familiar, so rehearsed, that it almost feels like a reflex, right? It's just the first thing that comes to mind. A young black man is found hanging from a tree, lynched, and before any autopsy results have been shared with the public, before any toxicology reports have even been done, before we even know the full circumstances of his last day alive, we are told no evidence of foul play. And like I said, there's only two options here. Either he put himself there or somebody else did. So the coroner has stated that Trey's arms and legs were not broken. But that alone, of course, is not an answer, nor is it a conclusion. We still don't know the cause of death. We don't know what markings were left on his body, if any, whether there was any bruising, whether there were other injuries that point towards something more than this official explanation. All of that remains hidden behind official silence. And on campus, classes were canceled, activities were shut down, counseling services were offered. That is the immediate response. But what about the longer response? What about the question that echoes not just on the campus, but across the country? What the fuck happened? And why is nobody talking about it? Let's speak in hypothetical here for a hot second. Let's just say he committed suicide and that this is proven, that without a shadow of a doubt, he committed suicide. The deeper issue here is this. You cannot separate what happened from the history of racism and slavery in this country. You can't just slap the word suicide on it and then call it a day. When a black man is found hanging from a tree in Mississippi, that image carries generations of terror, of violence, of lives stolen. So to pretend otherwise is completely dishonest. And I think what I'm trying to say here is if he did this to himself, he committed suicide and hung himself from that tree. That image is still so rooted in slavery, racism, and the KKK that like you would think they would have a little bit, or you would hope that there would be a little bit more sensitivity to the matter when these official organizations start putting out these responses. Immediately jumping to no foul play is ignoring essentially all of history. This kind of second layer here, because Trey was a black man, this story has barely made a ripple in the news. Why? Because it makes white people look bad should it be found that he was put there by somebody else, because it forces this country to confront racism. And right now, America is doing everything it can to completely erase that story, to sanitize its own reflection. We're far too busy talking about Charlie Kirk, who, I'll say it, was a racist, to acknowledge the stories of your everyday black people that are also suffering or being killed or even committing suicide. They should still be highlighted. So here's my takeaway from this first story. The silence from officials, the vague statements, the lack of reporting, this is not accidental. It's intentional. It's a way to keep this out of the headlines because it does not fit the narrative of we've moved on or we're past that. This is about control. Yeah, it's about shaping what people see, what they talk about, and ultimately what they forget. And I personally refuse to let any of that happen until I get Jimmy Kimmeled. Now, the second case, which is crazy that this even happened, on the exact same day, a man named Corey Zucaitis was found hanging in a wooded area near the Ameristar Casino in Vicksburg, also in Mississippi. Early reports grouped his death with Trey's, which suggested that it was two black men, and two black men had been found hanging from trees within hours of each other, but later it was revealed that Corey was not black. And that still matters because race and history intersect very differently in these two deaths. But the sheer fact that two hangings happened in Mississippi on the same day forces us to look closely and to ask what is going on and to demand accountability and look at the past. And that seems to be something we do not want to do. it makes us feel vulnerable. It's like when you tell somebody that they've done something wrong and they immediately get defensive and just make excuses or completely ignore it. That's essentially what the country is doing when a black man is found hanging from a tree. They don't want to look at the fucking facts and history and look at all the terrible, terrible, awful things that white people are still doing to marginalized groups because it forces us to look inward. And that's not easy, but I'm here to say it must be done. And here is the deeper truth. Even before we know the final autopsy results, even before the official reports are filed, this kind of discovery, this kind of silence, it hits Black communities with the weight of history. Mississippi, like so much of the South, has a long documented and horrifying legacy of lynching. Hanging a Black body from a tree was never just a crime, it was a message. It was a spectacle meant to instill terror, to keep Black communities in their place. It basically said, if you don't behave, this will happen to you. White people did this to uphold white supremacy by fear. And that history is not ancient. It's not some distant chapter closed off in the past. It bleeds forward into today, shaping how these deaths are seen. If it was so ancient, we wouldn't even be doing this episode. This just shows how easily things are covered up and how easily they are dismissed when it is not a white person, when the story is not blonde white female. So when authorities say no foul play suspected, and they say it very quickly, it rings hollow because for generations, authorities have done the same. Downplayed, erased, and sometimes outright covered up the racial violence that has defined so much of this region. Families were told their loved ones had committed suicide when they knew otherwise. Newspapers ignored the killings or treated them as just another tragedy, rather than a racial terror tactic. Police and courts refused to prosecute, refused to protect, refused to hold white perpetrators accountable, and that history creates a deep, unshakable mistrust. It's like as if I didn't even need to say anymore. How anyone can't grasp that and digest that is beyond me. So, what I also find very interesting is that Corey was a homeless man and he was white. And earlier this week, this is what a Fox News host had to say about the homeless population. Let's take a listen.
Billions of dollars to mental health and the homeless population. A lot of them don't want to take the programs. A lot of them don't want to get the help that is necessary. You can't give them a choice. Either you take the resources that we're going to give you or you decide that you're going to be locked up in jail. That's the way it has to be now.
Or involuntary lethal injection or something. Just kill them.
Yeah, Brian, why did it have to get to this point?
Right. I would say this. We're not voting for the right people. In North Carolina, wake up.
Now, I'm not saying that this happened because of what this Fox News host said, but it should be noted that these two things happened simultaneously. And either way, that type of take on a largely Black, brown population that suffers from mental illness and addiction, that's the reason people are homeless, not because they fucking want to be, is such a fucked up thing to say. So messed up. And also racist. And another example of how Fox News is terrible and the boomers are the worst. Truly. Biggest takeaway of this episode. So let's reel it in. Let's bring it back to Mississippi. Okay. Mississippi law enforcement has long been entangled in corruption, in racism, in practices that keep communities of color marginalized and silent. There are still no real checks and balances to ensure equality, as we see coming from the fucking White House. Investigations are left to the same institutions that have repeatedly failed to deliver justice. Oversight is weak, transparency doesn't fucking exist, and accountability is something the system resists at every single turn. Your boy is heated today. Not only am I sweating because it's humid as hell in San Diego, but topics like this get me so worked up. And this is why it matters. Even if Trey Reed's death is eventually determined to be suicide, even if the reports confirm that there was no external foul play, the way it is handled still matters. Because the story of a Black man found hanging from a tree in Mississippi cannot be disconnected from that long lineage of racial violence. And because we, as a society, cannot afford to shrug and move on willy-nilly when questions remain unanswered. I am running for Senate. I'm doing that thing with my hand when they don't point, but they shake their thumb at you. We should be demanding more. We should be demanding that the autopsy results be made public ASAP, that every single detail is shared, that an independent investigation, not just campus police or the local coroner, looks into what happened. We should be demanding that the family is supported and not left in the dark. We should be demanding that the media keep this story alive and in the headlines rather than letting it fade away as just another everyday story. Because here is the truth. Black lives are too often treated as disposable in this country. And when justice is slow, when accountability is absent, when investigations are handled behind closed doors, it only reinforces that reality. It tells families, communities, students, and all of us watching and reading that nothing has changed, that a Black man can still be found hanging from a tree in Mississippi, and the world will just move on. So I want to leave you with this. Trey Reed was more than a name, more than a student, more than the circumstance of his death. He was a son, a friend, a human being with a future ahead of him. And whatever the final report says, his life mattered. And it deserves the full weight of truth, not the easy dismissal of no foul play. And while it is still early in what I hope is an investigation, we owe it to him, we owe it to his family, and we owe it to every person who has suffered under this system to keep demanding clarity, justice, and accountability. And I cannot imagine how triggering and upsetting and sad and depressing it is for the Black community to see that things like this still happen. So, thank you for listening. Please share this story. Please talk about it. Please say Trey Reed's name. Do not let this be another story that disappears into silence. And on the next episode of Hot Air, which comes out on Tuesday, we're going to be talking about free speech, baby. We are going to get into the history of free speech, what's happening right now with Jimmy Kimmel being canceled due to his comments on Charlie Kirk, that orange guy, Trump, the money trail, which we know everything comes back to the money, how this cancellation and silencing can even happen. We're going to get into detail about what actually went down there. I've done a lot of research and a lot of reading. And of course, we're going to tie it back to the LGBTQ plus community, because if they can so blatantly censor voices of left-leaning figures in media that are straight and white, what the fuck do you think they're going to do to us next? Not to scare everyone, but essentially anyone can just be completely silenced. That's how it feels. So with all of that being said, you best hit the subscribe button wherever you're listening so you get notified when I put out new episodes, which is every Tuesday and Friday. Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod. You can submit your listener stories or even topic suggestions, or maybe there's some hot news topics that I missed. Maybe not hot news topics. This isn't pop culture. You know what I mean. News that falls in line with Hot Air. You can submit all that stuff on my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com. And remember, share the stories that matter. Don't be a racist piece of shit. And the louder we are, the harder it is to ignore us. And with that, I will see you next Tuesday.